I'd also like to acknowledge just a few special guests in the crowd. Again, our sponsors this evening are Mike and Julie Brennan, along with their daughter Molly. We're so excited that you're here tonight and you've made this evening possible, so thank you for that. We're delighted that our chairman of the board, Price Harding, is here with his wife, Nancy, who came up from Atlanta today, so thank you for that. And we also just want to thank the folks at the Columbia Museum of Art who've just been a delight to work with. And in particular, Karen Brocious, the executive director of the museum, along with Joel Ryan Cook, the senior director of operations, and their staffs, as well as the trustees of the museum. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Trinity Forum, we work to try to provide a space and resources for the discussion of life's greatest questions in the context of faith. And we do this by providing readings in different publications which draw upon classic works of literature and explore the enduring questions, connecting the timeless wisdom of the humanities with timely issues of the day, as well as programs like this one tonight, where we aim to connect thinking leaders with leading thinkers and engaging those big questions of life, and ultimately coming to better know the author of the answers. Certainly, many of the great questions of life pertain to discerning, valuing, cultivating, and spreading that which is true, good, and beautiful, both in our individual lives, but also more broadly in our communities and the culture at large. But caring for our culture is often fraught with both controversy and confusion. At a time when so much of our public discourse seems marked by incivility, even hostility, positions and politics are polarized, and pluralism itself often seems threatened, can we find ways to talk about the common good that are both constructive and hospitable? And further, are there ways of caring for and contributing to human flourishing in our common culture that avoid both the belligerence of the culture wars as well as avoiding accommodation or indifference to the distorted or pathological? Or, as some of you may have wondered based on recent experience, in the wake of a disaster that swept away buildings, neighborhoods, and community spaces, how does one go about building a new place and a new cultural ecosystem that incubates and encourages connection, creativity, and flourishing? In his book, Culture Care, Makoto Fujimura suggests an approach that's quite unusual in our current context. That culture is not a territory to be won or seized, but rather a garden to be cultivated. And that caring for culture requires not a battle plan, but the nourishment of creativity, community, and the generation of beauty. It is a fascinating and provocative vision, and it's hard to imagine a more persuasive or creative advocate than Makoto Fujimura. Mako is an artist, author, speaker, international arts advocate, and what he calls himself a cultural catalyst. A renowned visual artist whose work is exhibited in galleries around the world, including the Dillon Gallery in New York, the Sato Museum and Contemporary Museum of Tokyo, the Belvedere Museum in Vienna, and many others, he is known for his extraordinary mastery of an ancient Japanese art form known as Nihonga, which he has adapted and interpreted, as well as the lavish beauty of his paintings, layered with brilliant mineral pigments and paints. He's actually one of the first artists to paint live on stage at Carnegie Hall as part of an ongoing collaboration with composer Suzy Ibera. And he was commissioned by Crossway Publishing to produce original artwork to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the publication of the King James Bible, the first time that a single artist has been commissioned to illuminate the four Gospels in nearly 500 years. He's also been recently appointed to direct the Brim Center at Fuller Theological Seminary. And so in addition to all of his artistry and work in New York, he will soon be spending 3 months out of the year in Pasadena, California. As the founder of the International Arts Movement, a truly extraordinary organization which connects creative minds around the world and seeks to catalyze them towards working for the flourishing of culture, and I'm glad he plans to continue that work. He served for many years on the National Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, has been awarded 4 honorary doctorates, and was also named last year's recipient to the American Academy of Religion annual Religion and the Arts Award. He's a frequent author and blogger whose works include Refractions, A Journey of Art, Faith, and Culture, as well as his most recent work, Culture Care, which we've invited him to discuss tonight. Last but certainly not least, I am proud to say that Mako is a senior fellow of the Trinity Forum. Mako, welcome.
I'm so thankful to be here today. This is my first time in Columbia and Columbia Art Museum. Last time I spoke at the National Press Club, I spoke without images, which was one of the rare times that I've done that. And because I'm a visual artist, I like to show pictures. And so tonight, since we're in the museum, I thought I would do a little bit of both. First, introduce some of the works that I've done and have exhibited, but also to cross over into this thesis of culture care. And I'll end by reading one of the chapters. This work is 7 feet by 11. It's a very large painting. And it's called Walking on Water, which theme that I have been dealing with since tsunami of 3/11 in Japan. But as I will explain, this theme has been an ongoing journey for me, something that I began to think about certainly before the tsunami happened. But with natural disasters hitting us, it seems almost monthly, I wanted to begin by showing you this image. I'm going to go back to this theme a little bit later. So what do you do in a situation in which you're struggling to find hope? I visited Ishinomaki, the small coastal fishing village in northern Japan. A few weeks after the tsunami wiped away the entire town. Their grade school has been turned into a center for orphans. Many children lost their parents and grandparents. This fishing village friend of mine grew up in that village, and her family owned an entire fishing fleet. They lost everything, and they still haven't come back to be able to make their livelihood possible again. And I know that you had disaster hit here, and as I landed today, I was reminded once again how long the path is back to normality. So thinking about South Carolina and recent events here, not only here in Columbia, but also in Charleston and other places. I'm deeply affected by these events, and it seems that especially after 9/11, I've been immersed in this thinking about public disasters, what I call ground zero realities of our lives, and how, as an artist or as a citizen, can we respond. I use traditional Japanese materials, as I was introduced, this method called Nihonga. Nihonga is literally translated Japanese style paintings. And in traditional Japan, minerals were pulverized. Minerals such as cinnabar or malachite or azurite, very beautiful rocks. But they have to be pounded by hand and pulverized to make pigments. This is a beautiful batch of malachite. And eventually they will be ground up into forms and mixed with nikawa, which is a hide glue, Japanese hide glue. And it's water-based technique painted on paper or silk. But what I found very interesting, I was doing an artist talk at one of my exhibits in New York City in the 90s. And I spoke about this process of pulverization of minerals and how each rock has to be pulverized by hand. The master pigment maker his or her training is to create very distinct pulverized prisms that these pigments become. So if you look under a microscope, each pigment is unique, but they are of the same weight. If you put them in the machine and pulverize it that way, the resulting pigments will be under a microscope look very round, but pulverized by hand, it shatters and it creates these thousands of little prisms. And so mixed that in layers and layers, sometimes over 70, 80 layers, over and over with thin mixture, you get a surface that is absolutely prismatic. Now, you look at an image and you might think that it is blue or red, but if you spend a little time gazing at it, at the surface, your eye actually can see so much more than what our mind can categorize. So as our mind begins to release that sense of reality, we actually see these prismatic colors. It's actually astounding when you experience it. And so my art deals with these phenomenological realities or sensory realities. And I'm always interested in what happens to us when experience leads to knowledge rather than thinking the other way, right? Typical way of understanding knowledge today is information and rational, creating categories, reducing experiences into manageable chunks. But what happens if knowledge was pursued the other way from our senses? And this is the kind of inquiry that I'm interested in as an artist, and I'm persuaded to argue for. And this kind of language of experience is very much at the heart of culture care. When I say culture is a garden, it is not a territory to be fought over, because in culture wars, everybody loses. There is no winners there. And after many years after Dr. James Davison Hunter, a sociologist at the University of Virginia, coined this term, culture wars, his book came out, I believe, in late 80s. We have seen the polarization and division in culture over and over. In fact, it's so much so that we've become numb to it today. Each side, no matter what stance you take ideologically, you end up defending a turf that you never thought that you'd be defending. And so that there is this understanding of culture as a territory to be fought over, and it is a Darwinian struggle to win that battle. But in fact, when you win, you lose. You lose that very conviction that you started with. And so understanding of culture as an experiential garden, as a discovery zone for us, is coming at it from a different angle, rather than from ideological, perhaps driven by hyper-rational sense of identities and ideologies. We begin with our common experience, perhaps as children, facing what is a magnificent display of creation, and the wonderment that nature herself brings. The skies filled with stars, and that experience of nature and the handiwork of nature and the materials of nature brings us back to perhaps a place where we can find common ground, no matter what the convictions are. But we do live in a conflicted age, and for 15 years, I was a Ground Zero resident. I raised my children there. 3 blocks away from where the tower stood. This photo was taken by my friend Billy Buzinski, who's a composer, standing in his loft in Brooklyn, overlooking the fallen towers that day on 9/11. And I was right there, underneath, trapped in the subway, and trying to find my family. We do live facing our ground zeros every day. It could be a public disaster like New York City or Washington, D.C., or even natural disasters like what you experienced here in Colombia. But it could also be private, personal ground zeros of our lives. And faced with that reality, brokenness and fragmentation, and how we often fall so far short of our ideals, no matter where we stand in our ideals and where we want to see the world go, we all share in this common suffering. And so I began to deal with that in my work, and this work is a very large work. It's about 6 feet high, and it spans about 18 feet long, and it's called Still Point. I was taking T.S. Eliot's last masterpiece, 4 quartets, journeying with this poem after 9/11. And next week I will travel to Hiroshima, Japan, and exhibit some of the collaborative works that I've done in response to Eliot's 4 quartets, done with a collaborative sharing of co-creating this exhibit with another artist, Bruce Herman, and a Yale composer, Chris Theophanidis, with a theologian, Jeremy Begbie, accompanying us. And we will be hosted by Hiroshima City University to consider, in their 70th anniversary of the bombing, how might we talk about ground zeros of the world. And this work I did in 2003. Didn't realize until a friend, another artist, mentioned this to me, that these gold leaf, Japanese gold leaf is about this size. And, they can be gilded over on top of each other because they're so thin. They're microscopically thin. So you can create refractive images using gold and silver. But the shapes of gold falling from the heavenly skies said, my friend, that this is about 9/11. This is about the falling towers. Surely you meant that. And I didn't realize that's what I was painting until he mentioned it to me. Artists are very intuitive creatures. We don't know what we're doing. And many times after we done our work, people tell us what we did. And we often amazed at what that reveals. This intuitive reality, that's another territory of knowledge that modernist reductionism has ignored. And people like Carl Jung and others have noted this expanse of imaginative territories that we often put aside because we need to be practical and utility-minded. And this machinery that created modern cities have often excluded the margins and therefore push the artist into these margins. And these images that I painted after 9/11 surely has to do with that sense of exile and how we feel so not only exiled, standing in the ashes of ground zero of the world, but we feel exile from the very mechanism that attains to recover what is human in these cities. So I became obsessed with thinking about fire. And I painted many images of fire like this, kind of an homage to Rothko as well. But Japanese vermilion is exactly the pigment that Rothko needed to use because Japanese vermilion, if you know anything about painting, you understand, you're taught in art schools that red will always jump out. It is a color, hot color that will jump out and comes forward. Blue will recede, right? So you use that in creating a painting, sense of distance and sense of reality. Well, Japanese vermilion recedes. It does not come forward, and it's a little harder on the digital screen. But even in this, you see that it recedes. And this reality I was fascinated by, and after 9/11, I began to think that perhaps this understanding of receding fire, that if I can describe fire that is not just destructive, but can be purifying and sanctifying, that will bring us to a place of resolution rather than just devouring us. If I can do that as an artist and imagine a world in which where we had the fortitude and courage to walk through fires, then that vision will overlap with what Eliot talked about in his masterpiece, Four Quartets. Look to Beethoven for inspiration and Dante to walk through the fires of tragedy and trauma and end up in a place, the still point of the turning world, he called it. And that place, I believe, exists, but it has to be imagined, it has to be earned, and this is the work of an artist in a fragmented and polarized reality. Just did a show in Hong Kong called Fire and Water. Obvious reference to my past decade of work, which is kind of strange. You look back 10 years of your life and you say, fire and water. First 9/11, and I became obsessed with this creation of purifying image of fire. And then something hit me after doing this project that is touring called Quartets, that maybe I'm also painting about water. And then 3/11 happened, tsunami in Japan, and that affected me obviously very deeply. And I began to paint images that reflected both fire and water. This was our Gallery Hui in Hong Kong. And this is the image called Walking on Water. Pulverized minerals, very coarse minerals, azurite and malachite. When you first look at this, you may not see the green. But as you spend a little time looking at it, even in this digitized, reduced form, you'll start to see the malachite green embedded inside the pigments, which are, as I said, prismatic. So standing in front of painting like this is an experience of discovery. And I find that oftentimes in the art world, this kind of contemplative slowing down does not happen. So I have to basically create that sense in order for people to slow down, perhaps to give people opportunities to slow down. It's hard to do that in Hong Kong, but some people will actually sit down in front of a painting and spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes thinking about walking on water. What does that mean, to walk on water? Madeline Lengo had something to say about that. And I close with this quote regarding my paintings, and I'm going to go into culture care. In art, we are once again able to do all things we have forgotten. We are able to walk on water. We speak to the angels who call us. We move unfettered among the stars. That childlike wonderment of experiencing wonder of the universe inside of us and outside of us. When we lose that sense, we began to get lost in the fantastic currents of this fragmented age. And so many times when I think about culture, I think in terms of metaphors. And so I use this term in the book, cultural estuaries. An estuary is where salt water and fresh water mix. It is the most complex and the most delicate ecosystem, ecological scientists tell us. And it is the most crucial for the entire ecosystem of the ocean. When estuaries are destroyed by pollution, as we experienced in the Hudson, or the Chesapeake, or Tokyo Bay, it affects the entire ecosystem. The entire ocean is affected. And it is, as I said, one of the most diverse and delicate ecosystem. It is highly competitive. It's not homogeneous, but it is heterogeneous. And there are these pockets of homogeneity that exist, that is anchoring the whole fantastic, diverse flourishing that is happening. And so many people don't know that New York Bay, Hudson, was the oyster capital of the world in before 20th century. And the barriers that created by the oysters would have prevented, when Hurricane Sandy hit, the surging waves to go up all the way up to 25th Street, where all the galleries are. I lost 50 of my paintings that day. But that reality would not have happened if there were barrier reef oysters. And here, the artist's rendition now of the plan, the actual plan, to reintroduce the oyster beds into southern tip of Manhattan to prevent these things from happening again. How wonderful. I love oysters, and I say this in the book. I love, to have more oysters, but oysters seems to me is a perfect analogy, a metaphor for artists. Oysters purify the waters. By simply living and breathing, they purify the waters. And they would even take a piece of sand that gets stuck, that agitates them, and that becomes beautiful oysters. That's an artist. It's like purifying the waters of culture, not spitting out that sand, but living with it. This sense of agitation, this loss, this sense of exile. And artists are able to munch on it, turn it over, keep turning until it creates this beautiful object. So that's one metaphor that I use in Culture Care book. Another metaphor that I've been thinking about a lot of late, which is not in the book, beehives. I just took a class, a Rutgers extension class. They have an eco lab in New Jersey. I spent 3 days with beekeepers, listening to their, taking in their knowledge. And their knowledge does not come from reading books, does not come from information. It comes from loving the bees. 3 beekeepers. They were always it was kind of like a comedy team, because they knew each other well, and they disagreed with each other on a lot of the issues. But most of the issues they agreed, and that was their common love toward and passion towards helping beekeepers become beekeepers, stewards of nature, not just to be able to have bees, but to increase our awareness of the ecosystem, what bees can do, and how essential they are to the ecosystem. Right? You've been hearing about the colony collapses, and they have many theories on this. But and I'm sitting there listening to these 3 beekeepers and learning everything that you might possibly want to know about bees. We're taken out to the actual beehives, and I was, I thought that they would be wearing these protective, gears, and no, they just walk in to the swarm of bees, and they said, "See, bees don't sting unless you are stupid, and you make moves that they trigger alarm." And I'm like sitting there like, okay. No protective gear, just a smoke thing to calm them down. And bees are walking all over us, and this is our baptism into beekeeping. And then suddenly this thought occurs to me. Bees are like artists. People think artists sting, right? And they're afraid of them, and they stay away. But artists don't want to sting. Not all the time, unless they're threatened. And unless we go in not understanding this habitat of the hive, yeah, you get stung. And bees pollinate. They go around pollinating, and that's why they're critical for the ecosystem. They go 2 miles or more, and comes back to the hive knowing exactly where the flowers are, and they signal to the other bees, and they all go, and they come back, and they create honey. So these stinging creatures that we might be afraid of, they're really pollinators. Artists are pollinators. They go around and they travel for miles and miles, and they bring in pollen, and they bring in to create honey. And they are essential for the ecosystem of culture, because they pollinate the flowers, can produce fruit. And in many cases, we have so isolated artists as see the romantic geniuses or these dangerous stinging bees, and we haven't taken care of them. We don't have artist keepers who can walk into the hive without any protection, but know that these are good gifts of creation, the good gifts of the Creator, to give us such intricate, amazing details of complexity. And this reality in front of us speaks of this enormous possibility for me that culture too can be recovered. And artists somehow can work together to create beautiful hives. Did you know that octagon is a very interesting, in terms of geometry, mathematicians talk about, hexagon as one of the most critical building pieces of structures in the universe. And my friend, who is an artist, began to do these installations. Ted Lidenhatton, he's a Methodist pastor, but he's also a wonderful artist. And he began to use these hexagons as a theme. And I invited him to do a collaborative exhibit called Culture Care at Cairn University in Bucks County, Philadelphia, last year. And he installed these interactive pieces, mosaic-like pieces of hexagon. And as we rearrange these, we become bees. We become part of this creative process. And he was saying about the tessellation of geometry of a hexagon. And this is a Wikipedia definition of a tessellation. A tessellation of a flat surface is the tiding of a plane using one or more geometric shapes called tiles with no overlaps and no gaps. So here we are, nature's tessellation. And Ted said that hexagon is the ideal symbol for community, because the tessellation creates this strongest bond without any waste. And here we are looking at a beehive, and we see a perfect symbol of community. And artists are people who instinctively work toward wholeness. And I believe this. Despite the reputation of stinging bees, they are actually working toward wholeness and trying to protect something that is important for culture. It's good to listen to them and learn how they dance. Madeleine L'Engle again says the discipline of creation, be it to paint, compose, write, is an effort towards wholeness. So if you're an artist, I challenge you to think of your art this way. I know we've been taught that self-expression is everything, is the only way to be an artist. I know that we have this idea that we have to be shocking and we have to disturb. Sure. But is your disturbance toward healing? Is it toward wholeness? Is it toward a communal way that we can collectively thrive? I think that is the deeper question that artists need to be asking in 21st century. I think 20th century, we began to open the box and we experimented with so much that can be transgressive and shocking. And that certainly is part of art. We have to be able to provoke, to create dissonance in order to communicate, to scream, shout, yes. But at the end of the day, I think we need to move that reality, that conversation, that language, towards something bigger than us. And art can reach into that sphere, as Madeleine L'Engle says. Something about the mystery of the universe, about our collective possibilities, what our communities can become, facing our public and private disasters. How do we become artists that provides healing and wholeness? That's the question I ask in Culture Care. This is another image called Walking on Water. The subtitle is Banquo's Dream. Banquo is a character in Macbeth. And my second son is an actor. And he was telling me about Banquo. I began this painting. First I saw this production of Macbeth at Bucknell University where he was playing Banquo. And I came back and I began this painting. And then Sandy hit. So this painting, the series of paintings called Walking on Water, which was slated to go to a New York gallery, which was submerged in water now, became a point of battleground for me, because I lost all electricity. I couldn't, I didn't have lights, but I said, darn it, I'm using 17th century materials. I can paint without electricity. So I went into the studio every day. As Sandy was passing, I was painting this image. And over, oyster shells and quartz white, which is pulverized quartz, layering on unvarnished, ungessoed burlap, basically Belgian linen, but it just goes through, and the pigments won't stick. Over and over, have over 100 layers of me pouring paint onto the canvas, battling every day in the dark as the storm went over. And I remembered CJ's character, or Banquo, who literally is thrown into the storm called Macbeth, and actually comes back as a ghost, and this ghastly figure of a remnant of stability, of rational reason, of hope, of nobility, of integrity, comes back to haunt Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And so I thought, well, it is like a dream, so I'll title it Banquo's Dream. And when CJ came back for Thanksgiving, I told him, what do you think, if I titled this Walking on Water, Banquo's Dream? And he turned to me and said, Dad, how do you know about Banquo's Dream? And I said, I don't know about Banquo's Dream. Tell me. And he said, there is a line in Macbeth that most people will miss, but there is Banquo's Dream. And an actor playing Banquo has to lock himself into that dream. Otherwise, the entire play falls apart. He said that is the place, the only place in a play, a still point, where Shakespeare created to fuse all these various factors together. If the actor who plays Banquo does not lock himself in the dream, then the whole play falls apart into a horror show. An artist is meant to be working toward wholeness, right? So the fragmentation, the storms of life, there is Banquo in the story. There is a Banquo in the story of your life and my life. There's that still point somewhere, but most of us miss it. This photo, beautiful photo, was taken by Ted. I'm grateful that this side of the gallery didn't have any lights. But sun came in the morning around 10 o'clock and lit up the surface, and it came alive. I'm going to finish by reading this one short chapter of Culture Care. The pretext for this is almost everything that I've been talking about. I speak about Vincent van Gogh and Emily Dickinson as two examples of artists who were forced into the margins because of the encroaching reality of industrialization and reductionism that will take over in modernism. I talk about Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, which all of you know, and how the only building in this masterpiece painting that is not lit is the Reformed Church smack in the middle of the painting. And I have spoken about this, our commencement speeches, so you can look this up. But So I refer to that, and I talk about meastapa, which is an old English word for border stalkers. Okay, and the chapter is called "Our Calling into the Starry Night." Art poses questions. It probes into our lives as living parables. One question we need to face is, what do we do if Vincent is right, that the church is not lit, but the Holy Spirit, the Spirit has gone out into the nature and into the skies, the starry night? What do we do in a culture in which the light of the Spirit has departed church buildings and gone swirling instead into nature, into life's margins? What do we do in a culture in which the church is viewed as only a lifeless structural memory of the moral underpinnings that keep the world from falling apart? In Vincent's painting, actually the structure of the Reformed Church, this steeple, holds the painting together, as if to say, church is still important. It is still creating this center point of truth and goodness, but it has lost beauty. For we are living in the world Vincent depicted. The church has kept the structure, but we have largely lost touch with the Spirit in creating beauty. The church is no longer where the masses come to know the creator of beauty. Tim Keller, my former pastor in New York, says that Christians have invited in Jesus as their Savior, which is good, but we also need to invite Him as our Creator. Many have noted that the members of our emerging generations are not eager to join a church. The fastest growing denomination, I'm told, is, quote, none, end quote. These younger people show little interest in denominationalism and culture wars. And yet, it does not seem to them that they're done with Jesus or the life of the Spirit. They are far more investment in seeking justice and caring for environment than my generation. Perhaps many in the younger generations are becoming meastapas, artists of the borders and margins. In recent times, the arts have been seen as useful to the economy, but that surely misses the point of why we need to care for culture. Evaluating the arts based on an economic metric makes utility the bottom line, distorting our vision of the world that ought to be. Utilitarian pragmatism is tied to a world in which vision is stripped of transcendence. Before the modern age in the West, the narrative of Christendom provided a vision of the world in which the bottom line was the full thriving of humanity. Lacking that vision, we have now become accustomed to a reality where everything and anyone not valued at that moment can be disposable. Sometimes we become aware of our unconscious choice of utility and fragmentation over beauty and thriving of our reactions. Often our initial intent is appropriate, pragmatic and responsible decision making. Feeding ourselves is good, but that is not our chief end. Our calling simply as humans, and more so as followers of Christ, is wider than our career and our survival, even in a modern age. Utilitarian thinking is often disguised, but it still can result in lifelong entrapment if it's allowed in. Take the example of college. Most of us have been pragmatists, seeking college as a transactional entity in which the students spend 4 years of their time in tuition to receive back a lucrative career. Parents advise their children to major in something useful rather than in the humanities, often under threat of withdrawing financial support. Desiring a sustainable career is noble, but such recommendations debase education and our humanity. The pragmatic goal of having a useful degree can calcify into a dogma, or worse, reaffirm an unquestioned assumption that you're only worthwhile if you are useful. This is one of the effects of living in a culture where usefulness is the highest value. We are too prone to see a human being or a human endeavor as worthwhile only if it's useful to the whole, whether that be a company, family, community, or even a church. The corollary is that individuals who do not meet this standard are an attitude that results effectively in their exile from functioning normal world. Those who are disabled, those who are oppressed or weakened, or those who are without a voice are soon implicitly regarded as useless and then as disposable. Little wonder then that some groups are pushing to grant our elderly and disabled people the right to die, and that many are willing to be persuaded by arguments like those being made by philosopher Peter Singer, my neighbor in Princeton, and atheist evangelist Richard Dawkins for the elimination of Down syndrome children. Suffice it to say that such arguments are logical only granting the dogma of our being trapped within limited resource in a materialist world where those of us who are considered useless take up resources needed for the rest of us. Too often belief in such a world calls into being a utilitarian machinery of homogeneity, manipulation, and control run by those who presume to speak for the human species or the environment. But many of us, perhaps all of us, will be deemed useless at some point in such a model. Cultural care values reach far beyond materialism to the ultimate human value of love, toward a generative reality. Artists know instinctively that beauty, delight, and wonderment lie beyond the resources we assume we have. So that they are often the whistleblowers who bring constricted and distorted vision into our attention. Their intuitions give birth to music, art, dance, and poetry that defiantly and joyfully reach beyond the closed boundaries of nature into the mystery of existence. Artistic expressions are signposts declaring what it is to be fully human. Art is ultimately not useful. It serves no practical function. This is why it is indispensable, especially in the modern age. Dana Joya, the former chair of the NEA, has rightly said that we, quote, do not provide arts education to create more artists, though that is a fine byproduct. The real purpose of arts education is to create complete human beings capable of leading successful and productive lives in free society. We bring arts education so that we can have better teachers, doctors, engineers, mothers, and fathers. Arts are not a luxury, but a path to educate the whole individual toward thriving. They are needed simply because a civilization cannot be a civilization without the arts. A great civilization is an art form of the highest order. So I go on talking about my rampage against utilitarian thinking. But I do like my refrigerator, and I do think pragmatism has its role, and reductionism too in mathematics is a very important thing. So I'm very careful to select my argument. But let me end with the end of the chapter. Western Christianity in the 20th century fell into an adjective existence. Christian music, Christian art, Christian plumbers. Even today, have you ever met a Christian plumber? It's so scary, right? He's going to come and pray over your pipes and charge you the same amount and leave the plumbing. Anyways. Even today, artists are often valued in the church only if they create art for the church. or at least Christian art. Culture care will mean moving away from such labels. There is no need to disown these terms absolutely, but we do need to realize that these categories in themselves are concession to modernist pressures. They are volunteer surrender to utilitarian pragmatism, and their use leads only to disdain and indifference. Ultimately, these terms undermine our mandate to infuse all of life with Christ's presence. I am not a Christian artist. I am a Christian, yes, and an artist. I dare not treat the powerful presence of Christ in my life as an adjective. I want Christ to be my whole thing, whole being. Vincent van Gogh was not a Christian artist either, but in Christ he painted the heavens declaring the glory of God. Emily Dickinson was not a Christian poet, and yet through her most honest wrestling, given wings and words, her works, like Vincent's, like Mahalia Jackson, one of my favorites, speaks to all of the world as integrated vision of beauty against injustice. It's time for followers of Christ to let Christ be the now in our lives, and let our whole being ooze out like a painter's colors with the splendor and the mystery of Christ, the inexhaustible beauty that draws people in. It is time to follow the Spirit into the margins and outside the doors of the church. So I'll stop there and take questions. Apparently there's only one microphone, so you're going to have to come up to the front and ask questions. This is being recorded, so please help us by doing that. So just to recap, I am an artist, and I follow this great artist. I worship the great artist. And that saying that in a museum is a transgressive act. I know that, but I've been doing that since the 90s in New York. And that means that you don't get into certain circles. The well-known art critic, James Elkins, told me personally that if I just toned down that Christian thing, I would be far more successful as a mainstream artist. That was the greatest compliment I could ever received. Because I'm not interested in becoming famous or having my name as you know, as the artist of this time. I am like a worker bee. I'm simply being faithful to what I have been given, the task that I have to carry. And I do a lot of pollinating. I'm here with you tonight. I do find myself, though, faced with the complexity and mysteries of our time, that there's nothing better than being an artist for me. It hasn't been easy. My wife can tell you stories. But I am grateful that I live in a society, a free society, in which artists can be artists. I'm grateful that we have the vision that moves beyond utility and that allows for thousands and millions of people to stand in front of that painting that Vincent painted at the Museum of Modern Art and gaze at it, hopefully, for more than 10 seconds. I'm grateful that you can stand there and look at this parable that he painted. 100 years later, 100-some years later, that we see what he was seeing. Lonely and exiled in the margins, but he saw something and he wants to communicate that with us. Same thing with Emily Dickinson. Same thing with so many artists that I talk about in my books and my essays. So I'm grateful for this institution here in South Carolina to have persevered. I know how museums, how tough it is to bring quality programs into areas like this. And it's important work. It is so important that I believe that one of the greatest things that we can do collectively, and there are many of you who attend churches and who are followers of Christ. I ask you to be the first in line to advocate for this museum and local theaters, because that is where the Spirit can operate. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions. There's a brave soul coming up. Yeah, go ahead and get in line. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're probably more used to this than I am. Let me see. The picture that is easy to come through
Yes.
is that we all start with a sort of tabula rasa.
Yes.
That we stand there before the empty canvas, and we start, if we're artists, we start to paint, and if we're viewing a piece of artwork, we stand there with the tabula rasa, and oh, isn't it wonderful? We're just going to clear away all the creeds. We're going to clear away all of the old stuff, the old watering holes, I think, as John A.T. Robinson said. But isn't it true, and I would be interested in how do those creeds, those ancient creeds, how does our study of the liberal arts or how does your study of the old artists and the pigments, how does that inform us? And so I hope you're not saying, no, let's get rid of that stuff, but that's our grounding. Is that not?
Oh, absolutely.
So those old creeds,
yeah.
Let's not throw away those old creeds.
Well, I mean, we swim in them, don't we? And we that's where the foundation too, where we stand. Thank you for that question, by the way. I'm grateful because I'm a board of trustees for Bucknell University, my alma mater, liberal arts institution, and this is what I love to talk about. Why the arts and why humanities? Why do engineers need to be part of a Macbeth production? And we just voted to create the first college of management that is infused in liberal arts education, right? So why do that? Why do business leaders need to read Shakespeare? To even not just read, but act in it. Well, it's because, first of all, any specialty that we study is outmoded. How the structures keep changing. We live in what one sociologist called liquid modernity, and so nothing is stable. So if you're an engineer, the job that you will inherit in 5 years is very different from what you're trained for. So, but the basis of what you do can remain, and so you need to learn those structural, foundational structures. So there's value in studying in the specialty, but you also have to have flexible mindset toward learning and always becoming a learner, throughout your life. When we were at TNEA, we did a longitudinal study on reading. It's called Reading at Risk. And to our horror, we found that college students going into college read more than after they graduate. I mean, this is the structure of education today. You're pounding out, people's curiosity to read, to grow, and so we don't have time to read anymore. So that's the reality of culture, right? And I think the arts bring us back to that point of contemplation, of thinking about what is once an integrated vision of education, wholeness, humanity, religion, certainly theology, and the arts and sciences, and business, and whatever it is that we are moving into politics, we have to be a fully developed human being. And so I certainly advocate for that. I'm grateful for examples of those realities being manifested. And when I was at Duke University, which is a multiversity, not a university, I was really astounded to find that our Cortex project was the first time that the art department has ever worked with the literature department. I mean, forget the theology department. This was the first time that they collaborated on anything. So that's what we're finding in universities today, and I think we need to start to address that. But yeah, next, please.
My name is John Eels. I'm a poet.
Hi.
So I'm just thrilled to hear you speaking of Emily Dickinson, T.S. Eliot.
Yeah.
As you just mentioned, this collaboration between a literature department and an arts department isn't happening, and there's some friction there. I mean, it's between words and visual art. There's some rub. So how has reading T.S. Eliot, for example, informed you or disrupted what you're doing?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I read many theories about words and images and how they conflict, and but I don't have an experiential basis to because I've always thought of two in the same light. I think it's part of my Japanese heritage. Japanese language is highly visual and poetic and intuitive and lyrical and so forth. So I always connected my art to writings, and I was always writing in my studio, and painting images that came out of my writings. And so I don't experience that disjunction myself, but I realize that this is a serious issue, especially in academia. And I think one of the problems is that we have reduced both sides, or how we understand actually the world, from again perspective of both in terms of limited resource argument of materialist reality, which says that as Carl Sagan said, cosmos is all there was and there ever will be, and lost sight of this possibility of being amazed at a humming dash bird that is flying in front of you, capturing something that is completely beyond that world. And this is the world that Emily Dickinson kept on discovering and writing about. And so that says that poets have identified, Walt Whitman's of the world, Emily Dickinson's, very early on, that there was something beginning to erode our confidence in the wonderment toward the universe. And that, I think, helps us today in 21st century maybe to recover that somewhat. And so these poets and artists, Vincent wrote in 4 languages, Vincent van Gogh. His letters are now considered by Dutch literary circles as masterpieces of literature. His letters, written in multiple languages. So he understood that. Emily Dickinson loved the Hudson River painters, and her brother owned some of them. Saw her world, this visual world. So I think there is overlap. It's in our time that this fragmentation has taken place, and I'm sorry for it. Because I know the joys of when, Eliot was listening to Beethoven and wrote poems. William Blake was looking at Dante and, engraved and etched these fantastic poems visually and illuminated them. So I think there's much discussion that we can do to recover that sense. Thank you. Kirk.
Hi, Mako.
Hey.
I
friend.
can't ask you this question over coffee in Ryan Cooley's Midtown studio, so we have to stand in front of a group of strangers.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that amazing how this come to be?
I wanted to ask you about, you've been using the phrase intuitive knowledge quite a bit lately in the last years.
Yeah.
I want you to, a couple things. Can you talk about its relationship to imagination in relation to art? Malcolm Guite, in his book Faith, Hope, and Poetry, talks about poetry as truth-bearing. It's a way of communicating in a different way than our didactic culture of logical arguments.
Yes.
And I wanted to hear you speak on intuitive knowledge and imagination. And then also imagination and the church. Because I've been reading a lot lately about one of the reasons why the church has been probably declining in its effectiveness is it's not been a place to cultivate imagination, because I've been really fascinated with these things. So could you speak on that?
And
Cy Rogers sends his love. Says anyway.
Sorry, my supply. Culture as well, right? Eroding, if we were in a coffee shop, I will talk at length about Jacques Maritain, who is a French philosopher, the 20th century Thomist who brought Thomas Aquinas' theology into 20th century, talking with his painter who helped him journey into faith, named George Rouault. And in the Paris, early 20th century milieu, in which it was very difficult to be a Catholic thinker, he suddenly became, I think, one of the greatest integrators and someone who can speak into this issue of imagination. He is the one that I learned a lot about intuitive knowledge, that intuition and imagination, this poiesis knowledge, is deeper than the rational knowledge. It is not a dichotomy. It is not one against the other, but it flows out. Everything flows out of our deepest areas of integration. And that means our imaginative capacities are housed there. If untrained, it becomes dissociated from the basis of what Augustine would call our loves, the basis of our existence, and knowledge will emanate out of that. Every rational knowledge will emanate out of that. It was Jacques Maritain who helped me to understand this better. But he was also talking about his friend George Rouault painting every day these indelible paintings of post-war Paris, in which the painting spoke of this integration and this place where knowledge, philosophy, and theology can flow out of. That you are not to look at paintings as exiled from this knowledge venture, but it is in fact the core basis of everything that comes out. Today, we have museums, we have galleries, we are pushed into the margins. It is never seen as a core of knowledge. So what I'd love to see happen is, what if every activity of this city flowed out of what happens here? How would that change our businesses, our politics? Right now it's fragmented, right? So how do we bring that important conversation in an integrated realm where we can actually talk to the full humanities of what we bring to this museum? And art helps us to do this. Every art. Georgia O'Keeffe helps us to do this. And so this is a critical conversation that the church needs to understand. because we have created a culture in which imagination is suspect, right? You know, so you're imagining things, you know. And that wasn't true in Middle Ages. You know, imagination was part of reality. And there's some, you know, things that we need to figure out of that and pass out into some objective realities. But as a whole, we have much more integrated vision. So there was no artists. They were craftsmen, or they were makers of something. And it was, you know, very much into the whole community. It led into the entire communal reality. So perhaps that's something to think about. How do we see imagination as a good gift from God? That we cannot have faith without imagination. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. How do you have faith without imagination? Impossible. So this is one critical faculty that we have not been training in our discipleship programs. And so this is also an important role of an artist in contemporary time. Yeah. Yes. How are we doing on time? Last question. Okay. I'm sorry.
Nice to meet you again, Marco.
Yes.
My question, I'm working in the context of a church in what is probably considered Colombia's version of the ghetto.
Okay.
And I would really like to hear your thoughts about cultural care in an urban context, in where you don't have a garden,
Yeah.
but rather it's an overgrown pile of
I see.
weeds with
Real
a couple
ghetto
rusted,
you're talking about.
yeah,
Okay.
with a couple rusted Fords in the background.
Okay.
You know, I'm thinking about Cabrini Green too.
Yes.
Just they had to tear it down,
Yeah.
start over.
Yes.
What do you do in that kind of
Sure.
context?
Yeah. Thank you. I thought you were making. In the ghettos of the world, my son went to Detroit after he graduated and spent a lot of time thinking about this. But you know, there are gardens in Detroit, created by very innovative thinkers who saw through their imagination something green in concrete, you know, parking lots, and they blasted through the concrete parking lot, and they created a garden, and they began to teach young people how to take care of plants, and I suppose they need bees because there aren't too many bees in that area. And so it is possible. I know a pastor in Dallas who is very dedicated to very dilapidated area of Dallas. He started several gardens, and then he invited immigrants to plant their vegetables from their home countries. So Vietnamese immigrants growing their vegetables, and then he helped them to create a farm stand so they can sell these and create a sustainable economy. Then he created a restaurant to use the vegetables, so he can pay them regularly and support this whole thing. He increased every year. He increased these gardens, and he now has 3 restaurants. They're small restaurants, but they're organic restaurants. And then he decided, he's a Baptist minister who decided he's gonna be an artist, and he's gonna design every table that will be in these restaurants. And his name is Martin Hironaga, and I can introduce you to him because he has the answer to your question. So thank you. Jerry.